people joining us online, everyone, which is why we're waiting for the magic 1 o'clock to appear, which is why we haven't started yet.
Countdown.
It's great to see so many of you in the room. So fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope that you've all managed to grab a bit of lunch. So firstly, it's World Happiness Day today, so it's really nice to see everybody's smiling faces in the room. And it's also, as many of you know, it's the first day of spring equinox as well. And I can see a lot of people dressed in green. One of the reasons why we are holding this event today is it is also Nowruz, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, which is a 3,500-year-old celebration that has its roots in the Persian Empire. And it's celebrated by communities who have roots there, but it embraces all different faiths. So we thought this was a perfect opportunity to run this sort of event today. So sadly, though, in many of our societies, women are still being marginalised, and so we thought what we would do is shine a light on some of the difficulties that women are still facing in accessing education and careers. So we've invited a panel of very experienced women to provide us with some insights into what is happening in some of these regions. And it's going to be facilitated today by Rola, who is our head of partnerships for our Future of Marketing initiative. And I love the fact that Rola, one of the things that you put on your LinkedIn is that you're an activist. I think we need more activists out there. But you are an activist that focuses on human rights and women's rights, particularly in refugee camps, and also domestic abuse in the Middle East. So, Rola, over to you.
Thank you, Jo, and thank you everyone for coming today. And happy day, guess. International Happy Day, yeah. Well, okay, so without further adu, I would like to start by introducing the session today. And as Jo said, it is the Persian New Year, Nowruz, and also we continue to celebrate International Women's Month. So with Nowruz, if you don't know already, but it symbolizes a lot of things. It symbolizes new beginnings. It symbolizes the growth that is about to come our way now, and beauty. The theme this year is Inspire Inclusion, and that was the International Women's Day's theme. But we want to focus with a lens to education in particular. And today we will be discussing the critical intersection of education, women's rights, and the opportunity of careers in conflict-torn regions. Many of these countries in these regions face challenges of education and employment due to social, cultural, political, and economical challenges and barriers. And unfortunately, who's to pay the price? It's usually women, and because we're the center of the consequences of all of this. So, with a brighter light to all of this, I want to say that what we women are, and particularly what these women in these areas are, is a lot of things about what Nowruz symbolizes. And to say the least, they survive all storms and start over again, and that is resilience. They continue to grow, and that is determination. And they nurture despite all, and that is beauty. We will explore how inclusive education empowerment initiatives can dismantle systematic barriers and foster greater gender equality and socioeconomic advancements. By delving into the transformative power of education, we aim to shed light on the pivotal role it plays in shaping the lives of these women and breaking cycles and inequality as well. I will start by introducing our panel, and then I will get back to you as well, because I want you to be part of this as much as we are here today. I have Alia here. She is a former research scientist turned venture capitalist and co-founder. She is currently an investor and AI consultant at Global Millennial Capital, leading investments in AI and finance. She co-founded Anka Ventures, supporting women-led startups in the MENA regions with AI tools. And then we have Ivana. a dedicated researcher and educator, focuses on workplace equity, diversity, and inclusion, particularly gender-related issues alongside race, ethnicity, language, and accents. Her work offers valuable insight for managing diversity workplace effectively and responsibly, aiding organizations and governments in thriving within the global economy. And then next to her, we have Manjiri, Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion here at SBS, a published author, actually several books, and founder of organization Maya Care. This charity that offers free assistance to elderly in the UK, but in many more cities in India as well, and successfully keeps growing. She's a winner of the Age of Change Award by the She Inspires Awards, which recognizes the achievements of women across the world for leading the charitable work she does. Her next book will be launching this year, and it's called In the Name of. And then we have Bahara, who's on the screen right here. She's originally from Afghanistan. She pursued her bachelor's and master's degree in India, earning an MBA, returning to Afghanistan later on. She focused on empowering and improving girls' education, addressing barriers in school attendance, including menstruation taboos. Forced to flee to the UK later on due to the Taliban return, she received a Sanctuary Scholarship for a second master's degree in public policy and public management. Now she advocates for women, education in Afghanistan, and refugee communities, promoting talent, recognizing equal opportunities. So let's give them a round of applause. Before we start with the questions, what I like to do is to make sure that you guys are as equally as part of this that we are and our amazing panel here today. So as I start with my questions, those are just the buffer until you start with your questions as well. So I would love for you to think of what it is to have to say, even if it's not a question and it's just a thought. This is a discussion. So please keep that in mind as we go on. I want to start with the first question. In short, this year's theme is Inspire Inclusion. Now, this can mean a lot of things. We can look at it in a positive light. We can also look at it in a negative light. So this is entirely up to you how you see it. But I want to ask you all, and I'll start with you, but what does that mean to you? What does this theme mean to you?
So as you said, I spent a lot of time working in venture capital, and I think one of the things that I noticed while I was working was that a lot of times we would present a woman-led company to the investment committee, and they would have a lot of criticisms. For example, she only worked for 3 years at Goldman Sachs. And when I would present a male-led company, suddenly the perspective was, oh my God, he worked at Goldman Sachs. Like, we must fund this company. And so I think just really experiencing that disparity over and over again was something that I found really frustrating as a woman and someone who really wanted to support some of these companies. And so I think this topic of Inspire Inclusion kind of for me really kind of leads back to that. How do we sort of solve that sort of inequality in terms of funding for women-led companies?
Thank you. And Bahara?
Thank you, Rola. As we talked today, and you mentioned it's the first day of the spring, and Happy Nowruz to everyone. And it's exactly the beginning of new educational year in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, it's been 910 days that Afghan girls and women are denied of their fundamental access to education. And I believe that when the right of women to access education fade away in a society, that's when the population remain illiterate and they bring up illiterate children. And then the culture and civilization of the society can be easily changed and destroyed. And unfortunately, this issue is slowly becoming a common practice, and the world is forgetting what's happening, what the tragedy happening in Afghanistan. For me, the theme is more belongs to my story of my life, growing up in Afghanistan, facing all the social challenges, and that I was fortunate enough that my parents believed in education, so I had the opportunity to go to school, and then process to pursue my higher education in India, then become as a refugee in the UK. It shows the transformative power of education and how critical it is that should be inclusive, that everybody should have access to it. Based on my work in Afghanistan, I could see, despite all the challenges that girls were facing, they were so eager and they had thirst for knowledge, because they could understand that through education they can change their life, and they can have a better careers, and they can be leaders of the future. And among that, it was the perspective and the narratives of the families will keep changing about educating their girls rather than focusing on boys. And I believe that learning is not just a right, it's something that we born to do it. For example, the moment a child is going to start exploring the world and meeting the people, that's when the education becomes an essential part of growing. And I believe as we are privileged, we are in peace and have access to education, it's our responsibility to be the voice of Afghan girls and women back in Afghanistan, and not to forget them, and advocate for their rights. And I'm very optimistic about the future of Afghan girls, because they're not going to stop, and they will never go back to era of 90s. It's something that together, inclusive, through the path of inclusion, education, empowerment, we that believe in rights of education and the education defenders can work together to give them a voice and support, and give them the right support and right opportunities so that they can reach to their potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Bahara. Ivana, what does this mean
Thank you very
to
much, and thank you all for being here with us today. And hopefully we'll have a wonderful conversation today. So inclusion, that's a very good question and a very big question, Rola. So the first thing that comes to my mind is it's 2024 and we're still talking about this. And it's a little bit sad and depressing. On the other hand, I'm also thinking we've come quite some ways in including, and we do see more women in spaces that we have not seen before. But at the same time, we're also missing a broader inclusion. When we think about women, we portray women in media, in research, we should just think of white women. But women are not one monolithic group. They're not one homogeneous group. We have women from many different, various backgrounds, women of color, women with disabilities, transgendered women. So how do we, when we think about inclusion today, we really need to kind of expand what do we mean by inclusion? How do we actually enable meaningful inclusion of people from all sorts of walks of life? And meaning that we don't think about these groups, as we think usually as women, it's just one big homogeneous group. And the third piece I want to share when we think about inclusion is where we really need some movement is inclusion of women, all backgrounds, in decision-making positions. For us to move the needle of this issue, we really need more women in high leadership positions and women who do actually make decisions. And this is where we see really still stagnating. We still, and like what was mentioned before, making these decisions and pitches, who gets funded? Who is making these decisions? Are women making these decisions? Are women of color making these decisions? Are transgender women making these decisions? Who is behind these decisions? Because the outcome will look vastly different depending on who is making these decisions. And what we see, in particular in the Western world today, we do see a lot of women in workplaces. So you would think representation is there. You look at our websites, there are women, and there are women of color, there are women of different backgrounds, and we think we made it. But if you truly want to understand who is making decisions, you quickly understand that most of these women, most of us, are actually not in these high-level leadership positions where we are in position to make decisions and hence make meaningful changes. And I think that's a really big piece that we need to, yes, we made all this wonderful progress. Yes, we have representation. Women are actually out earning degrees compared to men, that they are more likely to get higher education degrees. And yeah, we made all these, especially in the developed world, we made all these changes, but we're still not making decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you. For me, International Women's Day is very important on two counts. The first being that why should we celebrate only on the 8th of March? And how are we going to behave as a society, as a country, as a business school the rest of the year? So the first one is on judgment, and how can we then judge people on the basis of where they come from. So I come from India, I grew up in India, where unfortunately even today infanticide and fiticide still exists. It's painful to see that gender discrimination at that level still exists. It's terrible. So, and it's the same country where you have women going to space, women, have more than 70% women in a classroom in engineering colleges and law and everywhere else. It's the same country. It's the same country in 2015 where an entire flight went from the US to India with an entire women's staff right from the chief pilot to the chief engineer to everybody. So that's the country, and it's the same country today where it's a question whether a baby girl should be born or not. So that's where the reality really is, and that's what International Women's Day is about when it comes to judgment. I'm connecting this to something completely different. I met with someone this morning from the business school, a faculty member whose reality is completely different because she comes from the US, and she was talking about one of her experiences where she had unfortunately had a miscarriage, and in the next 2 weeks she was delivering a lecture, and a male member of staff or someone in class thought she was drunk, which is why she had to go and, excuse herself. So these two realities are so completely different, but here we are judging each other all the time. So is it right? Is it right to judge at all? Because each one has a reality of her own, and it's important that we acknowledge that that's as painful, as sorrowful as anything else. On the second front, and this is really important because the whole event for today's event started with Tiffany, who's not here. But Tiffany and I were talking about it many months ago, and we said, what can we do? I said, can we thank women who supported other women? Because none of us, at least I won't be here if other people didn't support me. I'm very happy to say I have my 46th boss with me, Nikki here. One of my books is called Bosses of the Wild. It's a tribute to all my old bosses. And it's, if all of them hadn't supported me, I wouldn't be here. Definitely, and male and female, all of them, I wouldn't be here. There's Laura who supports me a great deal. She's one of my, real huge supporters, I would say, at SBS. But if we don't support each other, and if we don't thank the people who are supporting us, and they could be managers, they could be family members, especially husbands and partners and mums and carers and everyone else who makes everything happen. So I'd like to end with this because one of the ideas Tiffany and I were talking about is that can we invite them? Because in one of my organizations, I used to lead an organization 4 years ago, we actually got every member of staff to bring 1 or 2 people in. So somebody got their mother-in-law, somebody got mom, somebody got a friend who offers to look after children. They got someone, and we thanked all of them for supporting the women who actually make things work.
That's really interesting, and very different insights to every different aspect of what this means to each and every one of us. And I'm sure you all have your version of what inclusivity looks like and then what that means by inspiring. For me in particular, the word inspire comes with a positive light. I agree with you, Ivana. We're still talking about it, and it bothers me that we still talk about it, but we're talking about it, which is good. We are, and we're seeing movements, we're seeing shifts in organizations, but we're seeing shifts in our own lives as well, which is good. But I'm going to go on with my next question, and this is addressed to Bahara. So I want to ask you, what are some of the most significant challenges women face in accessing education and pursuing careers in conflict-torn regions, with a lens to, of course, Afghanistan in your case? And how can these challenges be overcome?
Yeah, so at the moment in Afghanistan, the women and girls are not allowed to go to school, not allowed to go to university, not allowed to go to park, not allowed to go to a gym. They're literally not allowed to do anything. Even if they are inside their homes, they are being victim of violence, and they're being victim of all the social barriers that within the joint families are there. So it's just not the factors that are impacting them outside the society. It's also the factors that are actually affecting them inside their homes because of the financial situation. As we all know that if women become more independent and financially stable, they will have a voice in their family, in their community. Unfortunately, that's the biggest challenge that Afghan women and girls at the moment are facing, and that there's no means of financial stability. And because of the political situation of Afghanistan, these challenges are quite difficult to mitigate, but they are not impossible. I'd say more than ever, it's important to that educational institutions, the policymakers, the education defenders stand in solidarity with Afghan girls and women. And because Afghanistan is the only country at the moment that girls and women are not allowed to have access to education or work outside or even go outside because they need to have a male with them when they're going outside. So I believe that in terms of short term, the educational institutions and the ones who are education defenders can provide more online support by providing online courses, vocational trainings that can build a CV for the women and girls, and that can help them to enter a new job market where they can work remotely. But these solutions cannot be a long-term solution. I believe in long-term solutions. It's our duty to take the theme of inclusion and empowerment and having access to education. That in here we have facilities, we have opportunities that we as individuals and as a community, as educational institution, we can lobby for the rights of Afghan girls and women, and we can do it through our members of parliament, through our government, through United Nations, and through international communities to put pressure on Taliban, and so that they can give access to women to have the right to go to school, to university, and have a right to do a job. And I think it's more important that we should create more awareness than ever, and also encourage our parliament members or government to not help Taliban under humanitarian aid.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Bahar. And I think that touches a lot on several questions I have for you guys, but I've kind of divided it into different categories for you. But I want to start with innovation. You mentioned something about, online learning if they can't be physically in the classrooms, and that's innovation in many ways. And we've seen that shift even here post-pandemic. What we did, we all shifted to online learning, but online working as well. So on that, I want to pass on a question for you, Alia, about innovation. So you work to enable startups by using AI tools, right? So in what ways can technology and innovation be leveraged to enhance educational opportunities and empower women into conflict-affected areas? But also any success stories to mention on that as well.
So I would say I have a lot to say on this, so maybe I'll just kind of start with a couple of things. So I think in terms of education, one thing I would say is that I've seen a lot of AI tools that are coming out right now that help kind of education become more personalized, which I think is really useful in terms of being able to kind of start to look at the differences between the way that women and men might learn in a classroom setting. And I think, right now, likely, I don't know the studies, but I'm guessing that a lot of like the educational practices are very much based on the way that male students have, learned and what is effective for them. And so I think that's one of the real advantages of, using AI in education. The other thing that I would say is that, a lot of kind of studies have shown that, even within the workplace, when a woman has a job, she is really tasked with a lot of sort of like the menial labor of, scheduling meetings or, note-taking, and a lot of these kind of tasks that disproportionately get assigned to women. And so I think there are a lot of AI tools right now that are coming out that will sort of minimize that by sort of automating those processes. And that will kind of allow women to spend a lot more time on the creative aspects of their role, and really, I think, kind of develop expertise that, makes them more valuable in other ways, and potentially, ways that will excel their careers a lot faster. So I would say that I think that in terms of AI, those are kind of some of the innovations.
Amazing, thank you. And I want to touch base on what Bahar said about governments and the change within governments, which plays a very big role when you're talking about education. And so, Ivana, what do you think should be the role of communities, governments, and international organizations play in supporting women's rights to education and career development in those regions?
Well, they obviously, as Bahar was mentioned, they have a huge role because they set the rules. Who is even eligible to participate? As we've seen, Afghanistan is obviously an extreme but real example where the current government, however we call them, stepped in and said that girls cannot be educated. So obviously the governments tend to make a huge difference. But it's not only just governments of those countries, but also more humanitarian and wider communities stand to play a key role in ensuring that women all across the globe have equal access to education and other opportunities in their careers. So it is easy for us to sit here, we're in a developed country, things are kind of easy, and not to think about the regions where women don't have the same rights. I think we do have responsibilities, including our own governments, to step up to create some of these balance and to create some of these parities as much as possible, because it will not happen on its own. And in some instances, the passing the law makes a huge difference. And one example is, when governments intervene, for example, passing down parental leave laws, in which are mandated at the government level. Organizations will not do it out of their good and free will because it's perceived they are financially costly and they're not bringing anything to improve their financial performance. But once it's mandated by the government, then you can see a huge difference that women finally do have a chance to participate in the labor force and have meaningful careers, but also step outside of it when they need it, when they're actually starting their families, because there are protections given by the government. If in countries, and I think the US is probably a very good country to mention, because they're probably the only developed country that I know of that does not have a nationally mandated parental leave policy. And you do see the differences in how women in those countries fare off in these careers. And not just them, it's also the well-being, their own well-being and health with the baby. So there are real implications down the chain that we don't necessarily see. So governments play a huge role into how to bring this more parity, but also kind of seeing a bigger picture is that this is not impacting only women, particular women, this is impacting a wider society. Here, and it can have really significant implications, for example, health, which is again financial loss at the other end that we are not necessarily seeing. So I do believe in some instances governments unfortunately need to step in and make rules and laws that will help kind of equalize the level playing field.
And I think that goes back to who's on the board and who's in the room. And most likely than not, governments have more male domination than women. Hence why these matters are not addressed as equally as to any other aggression of what we need to talk about. But it is true, they do play a big role, and they are the ones who kind of switch on and off button of what we can do and what we can't do. Talking about long-term and short-term, short-term solutions are there, but what about long-term solutions, Manjiri? So I want to ask you, what are the long-term benefits of investing in women's education and career advancement in conflict-affected areas, both for individuals and society as a whole, in your opinion?
I'd just like to add a word to education, that's quality education. And I think given that we are sitting where we are sitting, it's quality of education is everything. And there are a lot of societies, definitely I can speak about India, where across the states, there are some states in the south of India, Kerala for instance, has I think almost 100% literacy. It's a women-driven state, it's fantastic. The way that works, to some war-torn areas like Kashmir, which still the India-Pakistan war goes on and on and on, and it's very difficult to actually continue education there, any kind of education, quality or otherwise. But coming back to long-term, I think what we've seen over the years, one of my other projects which I'd been working on in India is for the past 8 years, every September, I spoke to you about that, every September I have 120 students who are the first girl in the family, first girl in the village sometimes to ever go to university. And they're usually daughters of farmers and daughters of very lowly paid wage earners. And they come in and they sort of just transform the family. It's not just she's going to university. Everybody's there because in September what happens every September is their families come in. And these girls now, for the past 8 years that I've been working with them, they speak in English. They stand on stage and they interview Nobel Prize winners and they do all kinds of things. And the family is just beaming with pride because they had no idea that this could actually happen. And all they did was send them to school, got them a scholarship, which is a science scholarship, and they're there. So this is one example of, how everybody's, because then they go back, they inspire other women, they inspire other young girls who want to be like this girl, and then they want to aspire. All of them, by the way, want to come to Oxford. Everybody wants to study in Oxford. All of them. I don't know how they'll get here, but they want to. And in fact, it's really interesting because I first met Kathy Harvey in Mumbai 8 years ago. 8 years ago, when she was there with the EMBA people, and these girls were speaking on stage, and I was speaking that time, and that was a big moment for them because Katie, the way you organize things, Kate, is that you have everything for the EMBAs in a 5-star hotel and everything, and for them it was, I'm from this village and now I'm educated and I'm actually going to speak at this 5-star hotel, stand on stage, and of course the EMBA students danced with them and they did whatever. But this is the power of education. And another one I'd like to talk about is the women with disabilities. The people who are in the charity that we have founded, everybody who works in the charity, everybody who has a paid role is a disabled person. They are either on wheelchairs or they can't hear or they can't see, mostly on wheelchairs. And about out of the 1,300, 50% are women, and out of those top 15 leaders, 90% are women. I don't know how that happened, but they're there. And what they do and where they're coming from, I'll give you one example, is of one of the women there. She's just 26 years old. She won recently she won this business award because she leads up the BPO, the Business Process Outsourcing Unit, which is part of the charity. She came to us 5 years ago, and she is on a wheelchair. She lives in a very small place in India called Chandrapur. I've never been there. It's really tiny, back of the beyond. So she comes in, and she's the only girl in the family who's educated. What happened was, during COVID, her father was on his deathbed. He was in ICU. And she said to us that, he's not willing to die. He's on a ventilator, and he's so upset that his daughter is not married yet. And in India, it's a very big thing, right? If your daughter is not married, you haven't really done your you haven't done what you were supposed to do as a parent, right? So she was in tears, and she said, I don't know what's happening. So my husband and I were here in Milton Keynes, and we said, can you get us on a video call? And in the ICU, we had a video call, and we committed to him, your daughter has a job with us forever. Nice. She's going to look after the rest of the family. She's there. And this was 3-4 years ago. She's done what she's done. She's bought her own wheelchair. She does everything else.
Amazing.
And in this December, I got to meet her the first time. And there she is, bringing the family in, and very, very conservative in many fronts. The mom said, I won't go out in public and I won't speak to everybody. Because I'm not really going to come there, but there she is, the daughter changing the whole family.
Yeah, well, that's inspiring, and inspire inclusion right there. And I think that's a really wonderful story, and I think there's so many stories like this to be shared as well. And I'm going to give you one example to someone I met a few years ago here in Oxford. She started a company that was all about enabling women and educating them with transferable skills. And these were in communities. She started in one place in Africa and then moved to different countries, and they've expanded over 17 countries now. But the idea of it was to start small, so education wasn't accessible, but for many other reasons, not just political, but they're marginalized. They're very far away from where civilization can be, for example, or it's the money issue. So she started really small by giving education on transferable skills to these women, and then with her connection in her corporate former life, she would put them into the hospitality industry in different countries in the MENA region, and mainly in the Gulf region where hospitality is a big thing. And slowly but surely that has evolved into an amazing movement where women are being educated. And after having a few conversations with her, what drew me to her is the fact that the first question I asked, I'm like, how do you pick the women? Because there's so many of us, how do you pick this over this woman, and so forth. And she said she really focuses on women who have been subjected to domestic abuse at the time. So again, it goes back to the financial stability of what we talked about. Women don't have that stability. And in a lot of communities in these regions, they don't have the means. And if they don't have the means, they can't progress and they can't develop, which is sad. But small project turned into a massive project that is doing amazing things right now. So I know we are almost, we've gotten into this conversation, and I actually do have more questions for you, but I also want to ask you guys if you have any questions or any thoughts, and then we can take it to the panel. You must have some thoughts. Yes, here you go.
infrastructure is really important into what governments do, for example. Infrastructure is very important into what governments do. And the lady next to me is studying this. She'll tell you all about it in more detail. But if you don't have the right law in place, how can you set a precedence to put fear into mistakes? For example, say the salaries are wrong in women, for example, and you have to go to court and win the right that you're doing the same job as a man. And you constantly keep going to court, and you look at the court cases, and they're all different payouts. But if you have parameters, which is up to this point, you have a £100,000 fine or whatever, or 1 million, depending on if you're a banker, should that not be set in place to put a fear into the contracts of employment, that if a company abuses how they pay a woman, that you don't have to go to court. You just have to prove it through some sort of mediation process, or and they're automatically fined if it's, you know, without dragging the whole process through a court.
Yeah, which also costs money.
Yeah.
Which will
And
be
quite
a whole
often
nother
people
drag.
are put off by the
Yeah.
fees of
Oh, yeah,
even
of
making
course.
the application in court,
Yeah,
which has gone up horrendously.
absolutely. Anyone who wants to answer that question? No.
Nothing to
I
do with
guess-
politics or government.
That's a government.
Yeah, I was about to add, I'm going to add something. I think that's a huge problem, what you're mentioning. In a lot of companies who are offenders, let's say there is gender pay gap, or, you know, I come from a Canadian context. I moved here from Canada. In Canada, we had this law that in province of Ontario that came out, and that the companies needed to, for example, disclose, you know, the composition of boards and the pay and all of that. However, the fine for not doing that was so small that it was easy to offend. So it wasn't, that's the problem. So it was, you are in theory as a government trying to portray yourself as being very progressive, and you're putting this new law in place where, you know, every company with 100 plus, I forgot what the exact number is, employees, they need to disclose this. And if there is no parity there, then they need to create a plan, how they're going to do, like there was some kind of accountability piece. But at the bottom line was like, if you don't do that, nothing really happens. There was some small penalty, like a few $1,000s, which is really nothing. And I think many companies were calculating, my numbers don't look good, like I'm better off paying that small fee than actually going through this. And then it's not just disclosing this, it's also then figuring out what do I do about this. So I do feel that governments really need to become very serious when you do have these laws, that penalties need to be harsh. Unfortunately, nothing happens unless that's in place. You know, the other example has been like, you know, and nobody likes quotas, but quotas for boards have made a difference. Still, nobody likes them, but until you implemented that and you said that you will not get funding and there's going to be penalties, this is true for European countries, like nothing happened, nothing moved. But suddenly, when that law went into the play, you know, things have started changing.
In law, there's certain parameters, like if you're a landlord and
Yeah.
you say something wrong, it used to be a penalty up to £20,000 for certain crimes, like illegal eviction and stuff like that. What happened was the government changed the law to any amount,
Oh gosh.
so that if you own a house for 100,000, they can charge you the whole house. And that was to fund the courts and to do other things. So it was very clever change of law to benefit financially the infrastructure of the courts and stuff. But they don't have these parameters that companies, if you do a certain thing, if you do another thing, you have these parameters up to a limit.
No.
This is where the lawmakers, are they mainly men?
Yes. Yeah. You can only imagine. Yeah. Unfortunately, so we need more individuals from different backgrounds and who can see the bigger picture, who will change the lives. But for
Inclusion issue.
it's an inclusion issue, but we do have it everywhere.
Which exists everywhere indeed. And I think also to shed a little bit light on like a success that I can share with you is that in Egypt, for example, they had no equal rights, obviously, but what it is that they done, there was one of the national banks of Egypt created a change of policy within the organization to ensure that women had more senior leadership roles. And by doing so, they do that through education. So they educated these top senior executives. They made sure that each top senior executive brought one person with them along, kind of like their wing, to enable them into these positions as their successors. And that one condition was it had to be a woman. And they've succeeded in that, and they've applied it, and it has a domino effect. It's just that these success stories sometimes get so brushed off. We don't hear about them. We don't see them because the negativity out there is so much more dominant than the positive. Still small, but it's still going somewhere. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you so much for being here and talking about this. My question is about male allyship. So obviously everyone here agrees that education for women and girls is imperative, is enriching for society, it helps with our economy and so forth. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is a top-down approach, but should we also think about a bottom-up approach and actually think about educating boys and men around male allyship, and why actually thinking about an inclusive society is important, and actually starting from an early age, and what do you think that actually looks like?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think off stage we were talking about this, and I'll leave it to any one of you if you want to say something about this.
Sure, great question, Preeta, and I think it applies to all Indian men, definitely, because even today you will have a situation where a mother-in-law doesn't like the fact that her son is helping his wife. You know, it's a terrible situation. Even now, I know that's where it's stemming from. So, great question, no doubt. I would just say that everybody who has a son, and my mom did this, definitely. My mom was a doctor, and she did this definitely with my brother and me. I never saw any difference between how we were treated. That's all we need to do. The day we stop saying this is your doll and this is your car and this is your fighter, you're a fighter pilot and she's whatever she is. We just have to start there.
Yeah.
If that's done, everything will happen, because then they'll aspire to be who they need to be. In my case, I can very happily tell you that I was a single mother for 8 years, and then I got married 14 years ago, and I'm married to my husband. And it's been so ridiculous how good a father he's been to my daughter that they used to think he's the single parent. Because I would be in London working, and he would go for the school events in Milton Keynes. And when my daughter was here in Oxford, I was in India for 3 years, and he would do all the dropping and picking every 6 weeks and do all of that. And that is also, despite coming from a family where definitely it was not all right for men to pick up some of the housework. It's just him. And to conclude exactly what you're saying, the boys need to see somebody else doing it, and they'll be fine.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's the women who says, "Oh, why is he doing that?" I mean, look at as a society, how do we look at a man who doesn't work because he's taken a break and he's supporting his wife with her career, or he's followed her to another country or something. Look at us. We're always judging and questioning whether something's wrong with his own career.
Yeah. No, and that's a really good point. And it starts at home. Education starts at home, and especially for those of us who are mothers and to a child, in my case, who's also a boy, I have this jumper for him to remind him that, the saying, boys will be boys, but he scratches out the boys part at the bottom. It says, boys will be good humans. And that is so important. And that, as much as he may not like the jumper, but it will always be in his closet as a reminder. And that is my role as a mom. It's my role to make sure that he will grow up to understand. He always asks me, for example, why do you work? Or why do you do this? And I do my job here, but I also do my activism job. He's always like, you're always on your phone. Yes, it's good because I'm working, so you can see that I'm working, so that we can enable a life that is good for you, but also for your future to see what that looks like for women. Any other thoughts, Alia or Hari?
I did want to add something, but I think it's maybe a slightly more depressing note, which is that I was just reading an article that came out in The Economist a couple days ago about the fact that for young men, they're actually becoming increasingly conservative. And so the gap is really widening, not closing, in terms of whether they think that women should even be in the workplace. And so I think that that to me indicates that potentially, you know, not that it's women's responsibility, but a lot of things are women's responsibility. So I do think that maybe the way that we're kind of framing like women's empowerment or gender equity is potentially alienating men. And so to kind of go back to, you know, allyship, I think we really need to kind of question how it is that we're sort of teaching them to be inclusive, because we definitely don't want to have a situation where men, you know, in 20 years think that all women should not be working at all. And I think that'll have a lot of, you know, worse consequences for our society than, you know, the situation we're in now.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, that is the research that's coming out, that younger men are becoming more conservative, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think it's a great question about the allyship. We definitely need more allyship. One thing that kind of distracts me with this audience.
He's gone.
Yeah, I didn't want to mention when we talked about inclusion. I was like, do I mention this, that we are actually excluding? Like, we don't have much inclusion here. And a lot of time, unfortunately, to this day, men are in powerful positions, so they are making these decisions, but yet they are not necessarily educated or aware about the issues. Most of them think that things are fine. So I absolutely agree that we need more education, both at the university. I don't think we do a good job here educating men who come through our programs, but I think also education needs to start in primary schools, younger schools. And it's no matter what you teach them at home, which is an important piece, they get educated in school, and school is gendered. So I can tell you from my personal experience, I have 2 daughters, and I'm usually it's been my husband going to, you know, pickups, doing this and that, like if there's a parent-teacher interview, there's something. And my kids started noticing that, you know, Mommy, why don't you come? So they started shaming me, like it's all other moms come. Like, but Daddy is there every time, but other moms come.
Yeah.
And other kids, they're telling my kids, this is what's appropriate behavior. And then we had to sit down and teach them this. No, this is not appropriate. Like this is what, you know, different families works different, but they are being taught these gender norms even at such a young age, no matter what you do in school. Yeah. And the other thing to consider about who are teachers in primary schools, it's mostly women, and it's also work that's heavily underpaid, like the care, which is traditionally seen as a more feminine work. It's not much valued in our society. So I think we need to flip the scenario there as well. We need to show more value for the care work and have more men in those positions. So in some ways, we need to include men in that kind of work and women in these kinds to have a more balanced picture of what is appropriate for both boys and girls. But I think education and just awareness is critical, and I still don't think we have enough of that. And I think a lot of people, and highly educated people, well-meaningful people, just like, what do you mean? Like, you know, that they'll come here, they'll come to Oxford, like, well, but look at all these women in classroom. Like, they've got it all, and if not more. And men, I think going back to Alia's point, I think there is this perception now women are getting even more because we have quotas, we have policies, there is more talk. It's just talk for the most time, but there is this talk, they're feeling like every time I apply for a job as a man, I'm going to be excluded because it's a woman who's going to get it, no matter how good I am. So we are creating, I think there is something happening, to Alia's point, that we are creating this narrative where they're feeling threatened. And that kind of counter to inclusion, I would say. So I think we need everyone on the same page. We need everybody to understand what the issues are, and we definitely need allyship.
I think something that comes to mind now is that, so I've worked a lot in the Middle East, and my work was a lot in refugee camps. So education was whatever was there and available to them by UNRWA, for example. But a lot of the times when I speak to people from that region, it's that barrier and the balance between, yes, we want to have the rights and the option to actually be educated or get higher education or be able to work. But then you have the other end of that spectrum as well of like, no, my husband is working and I'm a stay-at-home mom and I'm enjoying the tennis class I'm doing from now and then, and sometimes I'm taking care of the kids and that's my main responsibility. In these regions, and Bahar, maybe you have an opinion on this, because in Afghanistan, obviously it's very strict of, no, you don't get to do anything. You are a woman and therefore this is your job, stay at home, and even then you have another job of being abused sometimes or just looking after the children. It's like a label. But what do you think can change, or where does education fit into this? In both spectrums, those women who choose to want to not work, but those who want the option at least to work as well.
Yeah, Rola. So based on context of Afghanistan, I would say that the people I encountered and I was speaking with, and when they would see me or my other colleagues, because part of our work was included to go to different schools and research the factors that why the girls are not attending school. So they would be so inspired and they would say, I wish I had the opportunity to study so I could have a career or at least I could work. And most of the women I encountered, whether they were moms or they were young girls that were forced to marry, they would always say that I wish I had the opportunity to study so I could earn money and I wouldn't be in this position that I am today. And the point that I mentioned before, that education plays a really important role, especially for women, because women are the future mothers. And if the mother is illiterate and if mother is not aware of any fundamental rights of her and thinks that men are superior, there'll be no way for her to teach the children, whether it's girl or it's the boy, that no, you have your own rights and that you are not, if it's a boy, so she can say that you are not superior than your sisters or your cousins. But unfortunately, because there's no right of education, there's no literacy, the women think that they're born just to stay at home, just to work the home, the work home, take care of the children, and based on my experience and the time I was in Afghanistan, I barely come across to a woman who would choose to stay at home, because everybody gets to know the importance of how important it is to be financial independent, have financial stability, and be on your own, I would say, be your own boss. So in context of Afghanistan, mostly it was because they were forced or they had no means of to support themselves to get an education. So more than ever, it's really important to discuss about that issue. And one thing more, I would like to add that there were men, there were fathers, there were brothers that I come across. They would say that we do believe that our sister or our mother or our wife have to go to school and be educated so they can help us later in future with our with getting a job and with our economic situation. But the problem is the society norms and the society stereotypes, that if a man is allowing the sister, mother, wife to go outside and work, that means he's not a real man.
Yeah.
So these are the biggest challenges that when it comes to issues of educating, why we have to educate women. And it's all like a circle. The more you educate women, as a quote says, you can educate a nation and a community.
Absolutely. That's very well said, actually, and very well summarized. Anyone else have a thought about this?
Yeah, can I actually add a thought? So I wanted to maybe offer a slightly different perspective, which is that in Iran and actually a few other countries in the Middle East, I think Oman and actually maybe even Saudi Arabia, almost 70% of the STEM graduates are women. And yet, if you look at the workforce, I think I don't remember the numbers for the other countries, but in Iran, I think it's only 20% of women are in the workforce. And so I would just kind of, to go back to what you were saying, I think more work should be done to understand why that gap exists. Is it because women want to work and they don't have opportunities, or is it because they, are happy having an education and then letting their husbands work because that, is somewhat culturally normative. And so I think, just kind of trying to really understand where does that gap come from, and without kind of, forcing a cultural shift that I think could really fracture society. But at the same time, allowing women to kind of articulate what it is that they want is really important.
Yeah. And I think that also goes back to educating the men, which is going back to your point as well, because again, drawing a little bit on my own experience, so I was married and I got married young, and he was from the Middle East, and the first thing I said was, I don't cook and I don't clean and I like working. So you like this or not? And he didn't believe me when I didn't say I don't cook until I actually tried and cook. But I've learned now, I have a child, I have to feed him. But the idea is that there's that cultural switch in their brain that, you know, women can't work. No, they're supposed to be there to be a carer and nurture our children versus actually, no, we want them to be there. And that goes back to one of the points of partners. You know, the partners need to be there for us, but the men need to be educated in that respect as well. And I just think it's really important in the culture and the societies we're talking about in these areas, there needs to be a switch, and that education starts at young. And I totally agree with it. And there was a study a year ago that I saw where they said the first 1,000 years of primary education is the most important time of your education process and your brain development, actually. So if we don't target that early on, then we're just going into a cycle of they keep growing and growing and growing, then we have to mend it as we go along. But if we start young, then that can change something. Any other questions from you? Yes?
I was able to connect to each and every word that you're talking, and especially to Manjari because I'm from India. So I don't know if you can believe, like, they don't reveal the gender of the baby in India because if it is a girl child, the abortion rate is 90%. So we are in 2024, still they don't reveal. So, like, being a girl is like you're not even allowed to come out alive. So for me, I'm proudly say that I'm the first woman in my family who did masters and who came out of my own city, place, and country to here. It's all because of my mom, because she fought for me. It's a big fight with the entire family to not get me married at the age of 16, and to, like, she fought with everyone to enroll me into a college. So what I'm trying to say is, one day I was telling to my mom, like, oh, I attended this session and so leader talked about this, and he said he's also about to, and then she told me, like, Papa means, like, in my language, baby. Men, they talk in the forums, but what they do at homes and what they make change at the workplace is important. It's not about men encouraging. Do you have a women's room? Like, because women go to PMS and they go to menopause, and their body, sometimes we don't even know how our body reacts, and we need some space at work. I mean, to let it out. Do you have that room at your workplace? I was like, I couldn't answer, but then I totally connect with her or agree with her. Like, many men talk great words at workplace, but what do we implement? What do we do? Or how much respect we show in actions is important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make, and I think, Manjari, you can probably say a little bit on that, and I know we have some future events coming up on that specific topic of the woman's body as well, so I'm going to give it to you.
Sure. So yes, Aparna, right? Aparna. So thanks for bringing that up. So what Aparna was saying, right? Actually, it's actually illegal in India to reveal the gender. The doctor could be in prison if they reveal the gender of the child. So that's how bad it is, and and they don't. Obviously, they don't anymore. But coming back to what you said in the end, I'm very pleased to say I'm working very closely with Sue and Nikki and to make this happen. Is that among the things? Of course, we do have some quiet rooms. We have a multi-faith room. We have various things around the house. There's also around the school. We also have a pumping and feeding room for mums, which is actually changed its location. It's going to change its location to be more accessible in the next 3 months. But on the other front about menopause and everything else, we said, and we've spoken to a lot of faculty members, a lot of students across, and everybody seems to be very, very enthused about having this, is really incorporating the language of the discourse around women's health in general. So starting right from period pain, intense period pain, to endometriosis, to PCOD, which does a lot of terrible things to your body, to IVF and what you go through, and to later in life, right up to menopause. We need the conversation, because among the many, many cultures that we have seen here today, or even otherwise, even in Western cultures, it's not a very comfortable conversation with your manager or if you're with your head of faculty or whoever you're interacting with, saying that I'm really in terrible pain for the next 2 hours and I can't do this. But that doesn't mean I don't deserve my promotion or something else, or I don't deserve more responsibility. So the idea is to have a session like that with a gynecologist and something's being planned, but really to open up the conversation. Because that's the problem too. Because again, referring to the conversation I had this morning, that faculty member was saying to me that she had an excellent relationship with her manager, so she could at least tell him that I've been through this terrible, experience just 2 weeks ago. But she said, I don't think everybody can talk about it, or anybody might want to talk about it. And only a person who's been through that would know how it feels. I mean, it's a terrible thing to even listen to. So that's the first one. And the second one, which again, it comes a lot from what Bahara was saying, all of us have been saying. Again, a lot of conversations with faculty members and students, EMBA students especially, who have to be going to Africa or going to Delhi or going wherever else they have to go for their modules. And also to, in the long run, work there. I mean, tomorrow if there is a project in Afghanistan where if someone like me is allowed to go, I'd love to go and make a change, but I don't think I'll be allowed to go in the first place. And that applies to most of us, that we would, when we hear of stories, we want to go and make that change, but it's not safe. And as a journalist, especially when I spent the first 10 years of my career as a journalist, I thank my male bosses and my female bosses who lived through those nights of me doing dangerous things, but still allowed me to go, not saying, oh, I'm going to send this male person instead because it's not safe for you to go.
Yeah.
So the whole thing, the discourse also about safety. Saying safety, first thing, does my manager feel I'm safe? Does my family feel it's good enough for me to go to whichever country or place I have to go to? And am I safe? Am I confident? Because 9 out of 10 times, the women I've worked with in my teams, they say, I'm not really sure, I'm not sure. I want to go there, but I'm not sure. Yeah. I don't think I'm safe. So the whole idea is again to build in a safety session where I hope to see all of you there. And that's it among the two. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we're on time, but I just want to close it up with one last question. And with a few words only, if you can close your eyes and you had a magic wand and you can change one thing in the world and something for everyone to think about, what would it be? I'll start with you and we can go down.
Can you come back to me? I feel like there's so many things that I'm thinking.
Bahari, I'll start with you then.
I would say the same thing as Anya. Can you back to me?
I would just say I would really love to see a world when every girl has any opportunity that she wants to. She can do anything she wants in life, not be constrained by her gender. And I think we all are currently.
Amazing. And
on a very different note, I would say it's not about gender alone. I just wish the differences would melt. And if we could all be just, close our eyes and not know what the color of the person is, what the ethnicity, what the disability, anything. If it would just be based on merit and merit alone, that would be my wish.
amazing. We're back to you now.
I feel like I'm going to steal yours a little bit. But I do think after sort of all the work that I've done, I really hope that we in our lives at least see a world where, anyone has any opportunity regardless of, any feature or culture or religion. So, yeah.
Thank you. Bahara?
I would say I'm looking forward for the day when the girls and women of Afghanistan will be allowed again to go to school and university and go back to their employment. And they have the right support and opportunities to shine again. And I strongly believe in it. It's a matter of time and we will shine again.
Amazing. Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone who's been here.
So I think my wish is that we keep this discussion going and keep it very much alive. And I know that Alaya and the students have organised a social for later on in the common room to celebrate Nowruz. So let's continue the conversation there, at least in the short term. But thank you very much, Rola, and the panel for what I think has been a really enlightening discussion. So thank you again.
Thank you.